Dr. Deepak Chopra is joining us today. Dr. Chopra is a world-renowned pioneer in integrative medicine and personal transformation. He is the founder of the Chopra Foundation, a non-profit entity for research on well-being and humanitarianism, and the Chopra Global, a modern-day health company at the intersection of science and spirituality. Time magazine has described Dr. Chopra as one of the top 100 heroes and icons of the century. He's an author of 90 books translated into over 43 languages, including numerous New York Times bestsellers. His latest book, Total Meditation, Practices in Living the Awakened Life, published in September 2020, offers a complete exploration and reinterpretation of the physical, mental, emotional, relational, and spiritual benefits that this practice can bring. Dr. Chopra, we are delighted to welcome you to the Mental Health and Wellbeing Summit held here in Dublin, Ireland. We have a saying here in Ireland, Céad Míle Fáilte, which means 100,000 welcomes. We are reaching a global audience here this year through the powers of technology. You are most welcome, and we are delighted to have you join us. I think it's fair to say at a time where we are seeing worrying trends in the area of mental health. So this is a time like never before that we need to hear a global voice of hope and connection and love. So Dr. Chopra, I will pass over to you without further ado. And so ladies and gentlemen, will you please welcome Dr. Deepak Chopra.
Stuart, thank you for having me. It's a great privilege, a great honor to be speaking to you and all your delegates on the future of well-being, mental well-being, physical well-being, and also how technology today can help us enhance both our mental and physical well-being. I'd like to start off by saying that I've been working in this field for now 40 years, and my first understanding of what we call today, what we call the mind and body connection, began about 40 years ago when I was a resident and a fellow subsequently in endocrinology after my training in internal medicine. And we were then looking at brain peptides. Today, these are very well known by anyone who's interested in mental health. Serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin, opiates. There are other peptides called anandamide and on. But when we were looking at them in the 70s and early 80s, there wasn't much understanding of these chemicals in the brain. One of my colleagues once used the term molecules of emotion. And I immediately realized that that's what these brain peptides were. And that they were not only molecules of emotion, but they were immunoregulators. They modulated the activity of the immune system. So all these chemicals that are secreted by our brain as a result of shifting moods, they also, in some way or another, are involved in what we might call mental homeostasis or mental self-regulation. Okay, so all these peptides are also immunomodulators. This is a very big understanding that has taken us almost 30 years of good research to see that actually mind and body are not two separate things. They're inseparably one, just like wave and particle are inseparably one, or mass and energy are inseparably one, or space and time are inseparably one. We make these divisions. As soon as you have a thought, there's a neurochemical that's released. Every emotion has what we call a neural correlate, and there's a biological response. If I give somebody immediately bad news right now, their blood pressure will go up, their heart rate will speed up, they might get an arrhythmia, inflammatory responses will go up, and genes that regulate homeostasis will actually be suppressed. This is well known now. And on the other hand, if somebody is having an internal state of what we might call love, compassion, joy, equanimity, euphoria of any kind, an internal state of euphoria, then of course you release these immunomodulators that I just mentioned, which have receptors to them in all the cells of the body. So there's no event in the mind that doesn't register in the body, and there's no experience in the body that doesn't have a mental correlate. So today we talk not only of perception, which is looking at the outside world, but interoception, knowing what's happening inside our physical bodies, beginning to even go further into the bioregulation of our bodies through the mind, which has been the practice of yogis for thousands of years, but now because of technology, we can see how it works. So this is the first thing I wanted to say, that mind and body are inseparably one, that your body is a thinking body. Let me show the first slide, the next slide here. So this is the cover issue of the New Scientist, which is a British publication actually from the UK. And you can see the title of the cover story, Your Thinking Body. The brain doesn't think like the rest of the body. The brain usually thinks in English with an Irish accent, but the rest of the body is not linguistic, yet it is self-regulating. So there are impulses of intelligence, which we can call the equivalent of thought. And so once we recognize that, we can see that the body is not only a thinking body, but it's part of a larger process in nature, which we call self-regulation of the ecosystem. The ecosystem is recycling. The biosphere, which is the earth and the atmosphere, is recycling as our body. And everything that's part of the ecosystem is also our body. So let's see the next slide here to take this a little further in our understanding. Given this, on this slide, you will see what I call the 7 pillars of well-being. And I'm not making a distinction here between mental well-being and physical well-being. So if you practice these 7 pillars of well-being, you will actually enhance not only your mental well-being, but physical well-being as well. You will increase your mental and physical capacity. And before I even talk about each of these pillars of well-being, what I'd like to say is that think of the body, the physical body, even the brain, but everything in the physical body, even your genes, as verbs and not nouns. Okay, a noun is something that's fixed. You know, this is a noun. Okay, this is a noun. The book is a noun. The furniture is a noun. But your physical body is not a noun. It's a verb. It's a process. It started as a fertilized egg. Then it became a zygote. Then it was an embryo. And then it was a baby, and an infant, and a child, and then a young adult at some point, an adolescent before that. Now it looks like what it looks like right now. And it will continue to grow old, and one day it will disappear. So it's a process. And it's a process that we are aware of. You know, you can look at your body and feel sensations, images, feelings, thoughts. They're all entangled in this process. Once we understand the body is a process, then we can also see that it's continually recycling itself. So 98% of the atoms in your body today are not the ones that were there even a year ago. Your stomach recycles every 5 days. Your skin recycles once a month. Your skeleton recycles every 3 months. Even the DNA, which holds memories of millions of years of evolutionary time, the actual raw material of the DNA, the carbon, the hydrogen, the oxygen, the nitrogen, it comes and goes every 6 weeks like migratory birds. And in 1 year, you replace almost in your entire body. Now, this is a very good thing to know, because these 7 pillars of well-being are what influence the recycling of your body. And if we pay attention to these 7 pillars, I would say that we can influence the outcome of 95% of chronic illness. I work with geneticists and neuroscientists in the field of mental well-being, and they are very convinced now that every experience that we have, every experience, doesn't matter, it's a mental experience, perceptual experience, imagination, thought, feelings, emotions, personal relationships, social interactions, professional relationships, all of that influence our well-being, both mental and physical. My geneticist friends also tell me that less than 5% of disease-related genetic mutations, less than 5% are fully penetrant, which means they guarantee the disease. So let's say somebody has a BRCA gene for breast cancer, like say Angelina Jolie had. That's a gene that predicts breast cancer, and therefore, correctly, rightfully so, she had a double mastectomy for that disease. Now, it turns out that this is true, what I just said, less than 5% of disease-related gene mutations are fully penetrant, is true for all kinds of disease, not just cancer, but autoimmune illnesses, diabetes, any disease you can think of, including Alzheimer's disease and including some of the mental disorders that we talk about as pathological disorders. So only 5% or less than 5% of genetic mutations will predict either mental or physical illness, less than 5%. And for those 5% in the future, there'll be something called gene editing. We'll be able to cut and paste genes the way we cut and paste emails. You'll be able to read the barcode of a gene, cut out the defective gene, and insert the right gene. Now, hopefully that's coming soon, but there's evidence that that's going to happen. But having said that, that will affect only 5% of people. Okay, the rest of what we call genetic predisposition to disease, mental or physical, is based on lifestyle. And that's why I'm mentioning these 7 pillars of well-being. Sleep, both deep sleep and REM sleep are extremely important for mental and physical well-being. In deep sleep, we remove toxins, amyloid gets flushed out, the body self-regulates itself, and inflammation goes down. During dream sleep, we release mental stresses. And so sleep is now considered one of the most important things we can do. 7 to 8 hours of sleep, which is natural, not induced by medication, where you secrete melatonin from your pineal gland. Melatonin is also an immunomodulator that is secreted both in meditation but also in deep sleep. And so melatonin is also an immunomodulator. Lack of sleep is now considered to be a risk factor for diabetes, premature death from cardiovascular disease, and almost every chronic illness. So that's my first pillar of well-being. The second you see is meditation and stress management. And of course, there are so many ways to manage stress, including laughter and watching comedies and funny movies and listening to poetry. I know the Irish are so into art and music and poetry and literature. Well, an amazing way to manage your stress, and people have forgotten that now. You know, Ireland for me is a country of artists. As soon as I come to Dublin, I see all the tributes to the great poets and the great writers, and the great songwriters from Ireland. And that's something we've forgotten, that this is one of the best ways to engage with our soul, our spirit. The mind is the language of science, but the language of the soul is art. T.S. Eliot once said, poetry is a raid on the inarticulate. It's the raid on the soul. So, art, music, poetry, dance, ballet, simple reading of fiction, all these are amazing ways to manage stress, as is laughter, as is visualization, massage, I mentioned sleep. So there are many ways to manage stress, but 2 things I want to mention right now, which are very important, is that we have done a lot of research on the effects of meditation on the biological expression of our body, and I'll be sharing this research with you momentarily. The third slide that you see here is movement, yoga, and pranayama. So now we know that about 10,000 steps a day is ideal movement to keep the body in shape, irrespective of your age. And we also know that practices that enhance mind-body coordination, such as yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong, martial arts of any kind, and breathing practices, they stimulate a nerve in the body called the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is, the word vagus is a Latin word, but it's related to the English word vagabond. So the vagus nerve is the dominant nerve of the parasympathetic nervous system, which is counter to the sympathetic overdrive that is causing stress in the world right now. The pandemic of stress that is causing inflammation, acute and chronic, and causing people to succumb to disease, even acute morbidity, mortality. There's a lot of it related to stress. And our research shows that the vagus nerve stimulation does the opposite. It's called the rest, rejuvenate, and revitalize nerve. And the vagus nerve is stimulated by both mind-body practices and deep breathing and meditation. I mentioned emotions earlier. Emotions like love, compassion, joy, equanimity, peace of mind lead to self-regulation through the secretion of immunomodulators and molecules of emotion. But if you have stress, you secrete adrenaline, cortisol, and that compromises the immune system, increases inflammation in the body, leads to disease. So emotional and social intelligence is a very important aspect of self-regulation. Now you see here a slide that shows nutrition. And when I was very actively involved in emergency medicine or in internal medicine, and my patients told me that they changed their diet and their disease disappeared. And I couldn't believe that. How could somebody changing their diet get rid of asthma or rheumatoid arthritis or chronic disease? It didn't make sense to me. But now I know that the first thing that the food encounters when it enters your GI tract is the microbes in your GI tract. So you have 25,000 human genes, but you have 2 million extra bacterial genes in your body. Basically, your body, your biological system is, your physical body is the host for microbial colonies, the microbiome. And most of the genetic information in your body is not human. You have only 20,000, 25,000 human genes, but 2 million bacterial genes. And if you lived somewhere in the Amazon, you might have 20 million bacterial genes. These are more important than even the human genes because they dominate your biology. It is the human genes and bacterial genes interacting with each other that we call the microbiome, that are responsible for homeostasis in the body as well. So when you put food in your body, it can cause inflammation of those bacterial genes. That's called dysbiosis. If the food is manufactured, refined, processed, has a lot of petroleum products, which a lot of food that comes in a can has, it's preservatives, has too much sugar, it'll cause inflammation of the bacterial genes. And that inflammation will result in inflammation in your body. If you take food that is organic, comes directly from farm to table, has maximum diversity in plant-based foods, and has healthy meat, if you are a meat eater, which means organic farming, even for meat or for fish also, then that will not cause inflammation. So diet that has maximum diversity of plant-based foods, is organic, is not refined, processed, manufactured, or has inflammatory products or steroids or antibiotics, will actually cure or reverse dysbiosis in your body, leading to health and even reversal of many chronic illnesses and improvement in mental well-being. Slide number 6, you see here, talks about biological rhythms. So we are aware of circadian rhythms, but in our body, we have also seasonal rhythms. In fact, mental well-being is connected to seasonal rhythms as well. You may have heard of something called seasonal affective disorder, or seasonal affective disorder, or depression, which occurs in winter months because melatonin goes down. So the seasons, whether it's the seasons, the cycles of day and night, even the gravitational rhythms of the sun and the moon, and the lunar rhythms, all actually have effects on our biology. Being in touch with nature makes people feel better. They say, I felt better when I went for a picnic, or I walked on the beach, or went to the forest. And the reason is that when you're grounding yourself, or even touching a tree, your biological rhythms are in harmony with the Earth's rhythms, which are, of course, part of cosmic rhythms. So today, there's a lot of literature on biological rhythms and how being in nature not only heals the body, but improves the mood at the same time, because body and mind are the same. So nature therapy, being in nature, is also very important for mental well-being and physical well-being. The seventh pillar here I talk about is self-awareness, and I'm going to come to that in a moment. Let's see the next slide, please. So the next slide shows a bigger picture of what we call total well-being. Total well-being includes well-being in the workplace, social and emotional well-being, physical well-being, financial well-being. If you're worried about your finances, you're going to have stress, which is going to cause both mental and physiological disruption. And ultimately, community well-being. A community is made of individuals. So at our foundation, the Chopra Foundation, we're looking at all these aspects of well-being. How do you create a well-being environment in the workplace? How do you create a well-being environment in your social networks? How do you create a well-being environment in your ecosystem of social and financial justice? And how does that translate into community well-being and ultimately even national well-being? We have a lot of data. I'm on the scientific advisory board of Gallup, and we have gathered data over the years that well-being is the #1 predictor of social well-being or social unrest. Now, today we see a lot of social unrest in the world, and that has directly to do with lack of well-being in the workplace, or social well-being, or financial well-being, or community well-being. And this has huge implications globally. And there are solutions to all of this. So let me share with you the next slide, and then we will go from there. So this is a slide of research that we've done with other collaborators, including University of California, University of San Diego, Harvard Medical School, that shows that our gene expression changes when we practice some form of meditation, or self-reflection, or contemplation, or transcendence, or mindful awareness. And this slide, you see that all the genes that are responsible for self-regulation or homeostasis, they go up, some 17-fold. All the genes that cause inflammation go down. And there's no drug that can produce this effect. This comes from meditation. And if you show the next slide, you'll see a further elaboration of this. And this is, there's an increase in telomerase, the enzyme that regulates the length of telomeres in our genes, and that regulates how we age. So this slide shows evidence that meditation can slow down and for the time being even reverse some of the biological markers of aging. One of our collaborators in the study was Elizabeth Blackburn, who won the Nobel Prize for actually discovering this enzyme, telomerase. And if you see the next slide, she actually went on to publish a book. I'll show you the slide later, but basically there are large scale gene expression changes when we go into the meditation mode. Next slide, please. Next slide. So these are all different points that I wanted to make. And epigenetics is the science that shows that every experience we have, sensations, perceptions, imagination, moods, feelings, changes gene expression, and that it is possible to regulate this gene expression through mind-body practices. May I see the next slide, please? So this is a slide, those blue balls that you see, those are basically histones, proteins, and you see DNA wrapped around that. And then there are epigenetic switches that go on and off. They're chemical switches, methylation, deacetylation, that go on and off based exactly on how you're feeling right this moment. And this is an ongoing activity that's happening in our body. Genes are turning on and off depending on homeostatic needs as perceived by the human body mind. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a repetition of all those slides. So please keep going on till I stop you. Next slide, please. This is the study that was originally published in Nature Translational Psychiatry on gene expression and mind-body practices. Next slide, please. Please continue. Also, during meditation, people have a change in sense of self, less of ego identity and more of spiritual identity. And this study just got published recently, although the study was done a long time ago, and shows an immediate change in heart rate variability, which is actually a measure of how stressed or how happy you are. Please continue. Please continue. So where are we going with this now? And where we are going is that our foundation, along with other researchers, are creating new algorithms correlating biometrics to well-being. And that includes everything from mental health to pain management to self-regulation. And this is now possible through technology. You can look at facial expressions, micro expressions, eye movements, tone of voice, body language, and gestures, and that will give you some indication of the mood of a person. And that can then be correlated with the biological expression of the mood. Let's see the next slide, please. So this is something we are now engaged in, mind-body practices. What are the biological expressions of a joyful, energetic body, a loving, compassionate heart, a reflective, alert mind, of what spiritual traditions call lightness of being. So all this is measurable now, and actually we're doing it through VR technology, through immersive dreamscapes, through bioregulation, through artificial intelligence. We can actually create the future of mental and physical well-being, which will be personalized, which will be participatory, which will require, of course, your participation, which will be process-oriented, predictable, and ultimately reversible with your participation. Next slide, please. And these are the algorithms that we are now creating. And this is very important, what I'm saying right now. We are seeing a global pandemic of mental distress right now. Suicide is the second most common cause of death in teenagers. It's a very sad commentary on our collective consciousness, very sad commentary, that suicide is the second most common cause of death. That people are not recognizing that mental well-being is as important, if not more important, than all the pandemics we are facing. In fact, if you are mentally depressed, or you have anxiety, even low-grade anxiety, then you have low-grade inflammation in your body, and you are predisposed to chronic illness. We can predict today chronic illness based on mental distress. By 10 to 20 years, it proceeds. So mental well-being should be our number one priority, and we are not doing that globally. Global institutions are not doing that. Maybe the WHO to some extent, but not the academic institutions, not the research institutions, not the governments. And it is thanks to organizations like yourselves, which are independent and not influenced by influence peddlers and cronyism and special interest groups, that is actually democratizing well-being. And so I'm very happy to speak to all of you because we can do that today. And we are right now in the midst of creating a global blockchain effort for mental well-being. Please check the choprafoundation.org or www.neveralone.love website. Once again, www.neveralone.love website. We have a global blockchain campaign going on, starting imminently for mental well-being globally. And we're also creating a cryptocurrency for people who want help, including people. We would love to collaborate with your organization to see how we can spread the word and democratize well-being, even create a cryptocurrency for people who cannot afford services through counselors. So if you go to neveralone.org, you will also see a chatbot called PIWI, P-I-W-I. It's part of Never Alone. It can identify mental distress within a few seconds of interacting with you, even identify those who are at risk for harming themselves or harming others, or at risk for suicide, and refer you to 5,000 counselors globally and help you actually get their services through cryptocurrency. So this is going to be the future. The future is democratizing well-being through organizations such as yours, and actually creating a global network of love in action. I believe that love in action is the only way, because love without action is meaningless, and action without love is irrelevant. But when we have a global movement, a global community that engages in love in action, that is totally transparent, that is trackable, that can trace where the content comes from and whether it's reliable or not, then we can create a global movement that will result in mental well-being. And ultimately, that is the key to a more peaceful, just, sustainable, healthier, and joyful world. Otherwise, I think, my dear friends, in the current insanity that we face in the world, which is war, terrorism, extreme nationalism, trade conflicts, eco-destruction, climate change, pandemics, economic crisis. If we look at this situation totally, you would say that humanity unconsciously is moving in the direction of collective suicide. And we don't want that. We now have to make a choice. And the choice is, can we go consciously, will ourselves, and make the choice to go beyond the fragmented, separate mind? Because we are not separate. We are part of a universal, deeper reality. In the deeper reality, the earth is one body and one mind. In fact, the universe itself is an experience in our consciousness. Body, mind, and universe are a unified experience in our consciousness. And if we're not in touch with our soul, then we've missed the boat. So ultimately, mental well-being also involves getting in touch with that most fundamental level of our own self. And that is where meditation comes in. So in the next few minutes, if you allow me, I want to take you through a very simple, reflective meditation that might actually influence the choices you make in the future. So please, wherever you are, sit comfortably, put your feet firmly on the ground, keep your hands open on your lap, keep your eyes half open, be aware of the space in which you are. You don't have to close your eyes, just keep your eyes half open and observe your breath. Even as you observe your breath, it starts to settle down. And as you observe your breath, your mind starts to settle down. The movement of breath reflects the movement of mind. And now Just bring your awareness to your heart, even with your eyes half open, soft eyes. Bring your awareness to your heart. Mentally ask yourself the following question. Who am I? Am I just the changing body and the changing mind, or am I a deeper awareness in which this is an experience? Who am I? And now, mentally ask the question, what do I want? What do I want from my life? Don't try to answer the question. Just be aware of any sensations, any images, any feelings, any thoughts that may spontaneously come to you. What do I want? Third question. What is my calling in this moment for my own personal mental well-being, but for the collective mental well-being and physical well-being of humanity? What is my calling right now? Being alert to any sensations, any images, any feelings, any thoughts that may spontaneously come to you. And the last question, what am I grateful for? Just that simple question, allowing any sensations, any images, any feelings. Gratitude is the most practical way to restore well-being. When you feel grateful for what you already have, grateful for existence itself, your body heals itself. Inflammatory markers go down, homeostasis and self-regulation kick in, both physically and mentally. So now you can relax, open your eyes, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Dr. Chopra, thank you so much. Your message is such a message of hope, and in many ways so simplistic because of what you're sharing with us. There's so much hope involved when you've been mentioning the 7 pillars of well-being. You talk about mental wellness and physical wellness, so interlinked that there's so much we can do for ourselves to ensure that the problems that we bring into our lives, like stress, can actually be managed. So it's a great message of hope. If I could ask you, I was reading recently Dr. Dan Siegel mentioning that he sees at the basis of every mental health disorder, that is there's isolation and loneliness. You've touched on this yourself, and that the answer to that is love. In the world we're living in currently, how can we, under the conditions that we currently have, how can we embrace a collective global connection of feelings of love?
Okay, so, we talk about this so much, love, and yet, we use this phrase, I love you, do you love me? And yet we never actually execute love in action. And the first thing to do when you want to execute love in action is 4 simple practices, and they all begin with the letter A: attention, deep listening. Listen to people. Affection, let them know you care about them. Appreciation, notice the gift that they are to humanity. Everybody has strengths. Okay. Appreciation, affection, and finally, acceptance. Don't try to change other people. It's hard enough for you to change yourself. So start with the 4 A's: attention, affection, appreciation, acceptance. And now we've created a global ecosystem to do that through neveralone.love. And we even have a chat box. And we even actually provide you the resources to seek and offer well-being. And this is only going to happen if there's a grassroots movement. As I said, we cannot depend on special interest groups.
Even the words neveralone.org, it's just such a wonderful collection of words to have together, isn't that right?
Neveralone.love. Neveralone.
That love. It's such a wonderful collection of words, isn't it? So fantastic. Dr. Chopra, you mentioned earlier on this global pandemic of mental unwellness, and particularly what you mentioned, suicide and young people and the difficulties that we are encountering. We are obviously at the moment seeing a huge rise in areas of addictive behaviors, particularly in our young people, particularly in teenage girls, where we're seeing social media being such an issue. We're seeing in teenage boys gaming and pornography and these kind of areas. We're seeing these worrying trends, and yet how can we embrace a cyber world, which is so important in so many ways, and also combat these worrying trends? For parents or for guardians or teachers out there, what would you say to them?
You cannot legislate morality. It's been tried since the 10 Commandments. It doesn't work. Okay, so what you can do is actually bring a higher level of joy and pleasure, because addiction is actually the search for spirituality. I've always believed that addiction is a substitute for the real thing, for the real experience of joy and ecstasy. Ecstasy is transcendence, ecstasis. So I think what we need is giving our children in the earlier stages of life those 4 A's: attention, affection, appreciation, and acceptance, because it is lack of that that makes them, as teenagers, search for other ways to experience what we call pleasure. And at some point, pleasure exhausts itself and becomes addiction. So addiction is actually along with stress, the #1 epidemic of our times. It's a sign of mental distress and lack of mental hygiene. So, again, with neveralone.love and other efforts and collaborations, we're saying, how can we give people the best practices for mental hygiene so that they're not tempted to use substitutes to experience joy?
Excellent.
Because that's what everyone wants, joy.
That's what everybody is looking for.
Joy.
Exactly. You mentioned in an interview last year that I saw, and I found it absolutely fascinating. I'm going to quote you for a moment, if that's okay, because it was a wonderful comment that you made. It was that our reason for life is to maximize the innate joy and happiness, our potential for such, to maximize our capacity of love. I'm going to say that again because it's so fabulous. Our capacity for love, and to unleash our creative potential and to be healthy. And then you said, if we remember that, everything else is taken care of. When I heard this, I just realized it's such a simplistic message, and yet so refreshing. And is it that simple? Are we as human beings, are we overcomplicating our lives with busyness and distraction and technology, instead of keeping it so simple? In the words of my favorite band, the Beatles, is all we need love?
Yes, you're right. All we need love, Stuart. But also the whole colonial history, if I may say so, is a history which has romanticized violence. So, Hollywood is always romanticizing war movies or romanticizing war. And our metaphors are all violent. War on drugs, war on lack of education, war on social injustice, war on economic injustice, war on terrorism, war on COVID. It's not about war. It's love and creativity is the solution. So we should get rid of those old metaphors too, war on anything.
They're complicated issues, and yet they're distractions. What we're really looking for, as you say, is the joy, the peace, the ecstasy of what comes with love.
That's it.
So simplistic. So simplistic. If I can also ask you, Dr. Chopra, a little thing I do at the beginning of every new year to reflect over the year gone and to look at the year ahead is to take 3 words that I put into my smartphone that are a focus for the year ahead. Now, I don't believe in New Year's resolutions, but I do believe in focus. And this year, my words were intentional and love and peace, to be more intentional about connection and love in both receiving and giving, and to have more ways to feel peace in my world. If you were to give our attendees 3 words to go away with, or maybe it's 4, but 3 words to go away with that they could enter into their smartphone to remind themselves of these moments with you that they can take into the entire year ahead, what should they input into their smartphone of those 3 words?
Actually, I'll give you 4 intentions. I use them myself, and I have them on my smartphone, even though I made them up. Okay.
Excellent.
So, number 1, joyful, energetic body. Number 2, loving, compassionate heart.
Wow.
Number 3, reflective, alert mind. And number 4, lightness of being. Lightness of being.
Excellent.
I'll repeat them. Joyful, energetic body, loving, compassionate heart, reflective, alert mind, lightness of being. If you start your day with those 4 intentions, the rest of the day will take care of itself.
Okay, they're 4 words that I'll extend into my smartphone for this year for sure. Dr. Chopra, we're coming towards an end of our time together, and we appreciate you so much taking the time to speak with us today. And not just for your inspirational words, which are incredible, but also to say for the humility in which you deliver them, which is really quite extraordinary and quite fantastic. So thank you for that. Because many of us here are mental health professionals or people who've been touched and needed mental health assistance along their journey of life. So from all of us connected here in mental health, we just like to say, for all the millions of people that you reach worldwide, year in and year out, thank you so much for the heart in which you have as a man to reach all these people, to bring mental health and wellness into their world. We have plenty to go away with today, to digest and to reflect upon in the coming days and weeks ahead. And I would just like to think that we can do that now with a freshness in our spirit and certainly a love in our hearts. So from all of us here at the Mental Health Summit in Ireland 2020 in Dublin, we'd like to say thank you so much, Dr. Deepak Chopra.
Thank you. It's my joy. Thank you.